I was on life support and basically was given back to my parents and told, go home and see if she survives. We don't expect her to be more than a vegetable. I am truly a survivor and kind of a walking miracle. I realistically should not be here with some of the medical things that I've gone through.
Expectation is not the same as encouragement and can come out one and the same as it relates to intent. The actions might look very differently.
I enrolled in a coaching certification to teach myself how to take care of myself. How do I eat? How do I process trauma? How do I do these things? So in about 2.5 years, I have lost almost 160 pounds, but it was physical weight, it was mental weight, it was emotional weight.
How much of the husband that you married do you still have access to?
I mean, his personality is...
Welcome back, everybody, to Flipping the Lid. You know what we do here by now. And today I'm really excited because we often feature some of the most impactful, influential people on this planet. And sometimes we get the special gift to have somebody that just has this natural light, this natural brightness, and an ability to literally put smile on people's faces just because of being in her presence. I met her in a very brief interaction around a networking table. I think I had a old fashioned in my hand. And the conversation went deep, and then I got to spend a day with her after that. And in the last year, I've witnessed her journey. Monica Connolly is a speaker. She's a coach. She's a best-selling author. She's so much more than that. She's a strong, capable, independent woman. She's someone who's broken patterns of the past. She's a wife, a mother. She's helped support many other people throughout her journey. And now she's in a place right now with helping herself not only have all these breakthroughs and live in a place of complete honesty, but now to compress the amount of time it takes for other women to do the same. So Monica, I'm super excited to have you here with us today.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here.
Well, you know this because I know that you are somebody who listens to our shows. So the only question I ask every guest outside of the way that I've introduced you and whatever I've said about you is, Monica, who are you in your words?
First and foremost, like you said, I'm a wife, a mother, a grandmother. I have very close family ties. I am truly a survivor and kind of a walking miracle. I realistically should not be here with some of the medical things that I've gone through, but I look back at those things and I know that I survived because I was here for a bigger purpose.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I usually go after the word should whenever I hear it. And it's interesting because in this case, right, I don't hear it through a lens of shame necessarily, more just the recognition and acknowledgement that many people who've gone through the same situations you have didn't make it through. They did not survive. They are no longer with us. And so I highlight that and slow down only for a moment because this isn't I should be here, I should be doing this. It's like, no, based on how most things work in the medical world, people would not have survived in the way that I did. By the way, that's not untrue for my story either. And so I wanted to acknowledge that and say that, but I also want to start right there, right? You've talked about a few things. You're this living miracle, this walking miracle, and you've survived things that other people have not. And we are going to unpack different portions of your story today, but let's just start right out the gate with what are all the things you've survived that would otherwise have maybe others not have been able to live today like you do?
Sure. So to start with, as a newborn, I had a massive hypoxic brain injury. I spent time in the NICU. I was on life support and basically was given back to my parents and told, go home and see if she survives. We don't expect her to be more than a vegetable. And I just started excelling at a very young age, excelling in school, just really surpassed everything that the doctors ever expected that I would be able to do. I do have some long-term issues. I have some hearing issues because of being on a ventilator, things like that. But I've met so many other people who had a child that had this same type of injury or had this type of injury themselves. They are not living the life that I am able to lead. And a lot of them, they did not survive it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know, I appreciate even just the way that you start it, the expectation that can be set that you're going to be a vegetable can also be received and handled and approached two completely different ways from the parents. right? You talked about how this is how you were sent home. And then it's like you leapfrog to now all of a sudden I have this intelligence and I have these ways of accessing information that other people weren't expecting on the tail end of this. Talk a little bit for just a second. If you have any knowledge, if you've had the conversations, what was that transition home like for your parents? And given the prognosis they were given, what was their mindset, their attitude, their approach to parenting and raising you from that point forward?
Yeah. So I do know a little bit. My family grew up, I had my parents, my grandparents, all of my aunts and uncles. We all lived in the same town. So it was very close on both sides of my family. I lived 2 blocks to 5 miles away from almost every member of my family. So there was an incredible support system in place when I came home that my parents could rely on. So I think that they very much were like, well, that's what you've told us, but we're going to have to see this for ourselves. They raised me just like they did my sister, my younger sister. They didn't treat me, they didn't ever acknowledge and say, well, you can't be as smart as your sister because you have this brain injury. That the expectation was always you are going to do amazing things and you are going to excel in everything. That was always the expectation that was put down. So I actually didn't know how severe the injury was until I was an adult, until probably maybe 10 years ago. I didn't realize how severe the injury actually had been. And then it was like, oh, wow, like this was not what the doctors saw.
Mm. As you also know about me, I pay attention to and tune in to specific words sometimes. And the biggest reason I think it's because words really do carry a lot of meaning, but they also have a lot of interpretation to them, right?
Yeah.
And you talked about this really uplifting way of living that almost didn't accept whatever was given to them. But you also said that that was the expectation. Expectation is not the same as encouragement. And though it is and can come out one and the same as it relates to intent, the actions might look very differently.
Yeah.
When you said expectation, what were you really meaning? And if you could give some insight into how did that show up through their words, actions, and behaviors with you specifically?
So it was always an expectation in the sense that I was told you will succeed at these things. You will do well in school. It was never an option to not do well. It was always, I want to say almost competitive, but it was always, you have to be the best. And so when you say that that's not always encouraging, that's exactly right. It was not always encouraging and, oh, I've got your back and, oh, you can do this. It was, there is no other choice. This is what you will do. This is how you will dress. This is how you will think. And this is how you will speak. And when I look back on that now, I can say, okay, that really got me through some hard things, but it also caused me to, as an adult, learn that expectations can be unrealistic. And I learned to set very unrealistic expectations for myself. And that caused a lot of problems for me.
When in your developmental trajectory, whether it was in, teenage years or you referenced, it sounds like it was in adulthood, like when did you realize what you just described to me? Right. It sounds a lot like a lot of the performance-based stuff that you and I have shared or talked about. You've heard me say, I learned to receive love, validation, and connection through performance, right? Similar to even what I'm hearing in how you're describing it. And so much of then your identity and your self-worth is then contingent upon what you do instead of who you are. Like at what point in your trajectory did you become aware of this dynamic? Right. And in retrospect, how did it shape your mindset and your belief system and your emotional state growing up?
Yeah. So I did not make these connections and put these dots together until the last probably 18 months or so when I started doing really intense coaching. I have done trauma coaching, really taking a look back and determining, why do I behave in these ways? Why do I do these things? Why do I feel like I self-sabotage myself? And it was going back and looking at these patterns and looking at these behaviors that I had grown up with, and realizing that, from a young age, you're shaped by those external things that are around you. And I think most parents don't ever intend to have that be malicious. But when you are raising your child and telling them you can do everything, and to have these very, very high expectations for themselves, when they don't accomplish that, then I found when I wasn't able to accomplish those things, I was incredibly hard on myself. It became my identity that I always had to outperform the next person. I always had to be better. And it came at a cost. Eventually, it came at a cost of my health, because everybody else became a priority over myself. And making sure everybody else was taken care of, making sure that I was always, my house looked perfect. Everybody was dressed perfect, the Martha Stewart. And it really, when it's done in a way where there isn't that encouragement, or where, like in my case, where it was never, oh, you reached this, you reached this goal. It was always, well, why didn't you do better? Why didn't you do it this way? Why couldn't you do it as good as this person? So there was that comparison, that constant comparison, which I still, I've had to learn to shut that off now and be like, for some people, I will never be enough. I will never meet the expectations that they have put down. And you have to learn to be okay with that. And when you reach that point where you can say, that's okay, because that's not mine to own. I don't have to own that expectation. Man, that is just, it's a huge turning point in your healing.
It really is. And it's interesting, because even listening to the way that you talk about it, and I see that unshakable belief sign behind you, right? It reminds me as well of even things that I have shared as it relates to some of my story, which was early on, my mindset drove me to a place that I was able to perform in ways that many were surprised by. Right. And there was a really strong belief that if I had a solid mindset, if I was mentally tough, that anything is possible. Right. And that's true to a degree. What I learned many years later, and this about my story, there's other parts of the equation. But it's interesting, because you did talk about very early, it's like, some of our hardest moments are some of our greatest gifts, right? This idea of unshakable belief, failure was never an option for you.
Yeah.
And in a lot of ways, it helps develop this resiliency and this unshakable belief. But it's interesting, because I think belief is hollow without conviction and embodiment.
Yeah.
And I'd love to understand, in this idea of unshakable belief, which we'll talk about how that works and relates to the podcast that you have now and the work that you're doing later in our episode. But if you were to look at your life through this idea and lens of unshakable belief, how did it evolve as you started to understand and shift from expectations to acceptance, from external pressure to internal love, right? From this mindset and performance-based piece to this full embodiment of this woman that I see in front of me?
Yeah. For me, it started with being invited into a room. I had never done any kind of personal development. And a friend of mine was hosting an event and was like, hey, you should come get in this room. And at the time, it was like, I don't do that. I don't talk to strangers. I don't get in rooms. I don't do those things.
I don't do that. I totally know exactly what you're talking about. My wife is that way, by the way. She's like, no, I don't do events.
Yeah.
Got it. Cool. Yeah.
And she's like, no, it's okay. She's like, it's a small event. There's only going to be 30 people. It's a small event. You really should come. And so after some more prodding and stuff, I agreed to go. And I want to preface this with the fact that up until that point, and until probably 2 years prior to that, so that was about 2 years ago, and about 2 years prior to that, I didn't even get a haircut on a regular basis because I was too busy taking care of everybody else. I remember going years without a haircut because I didn't want to ask somebody else to come in and help take care of my kids or things like that. I didn't want to be a burden to people. And so I walked in that room, and she was actually the only person that I knew that was there. And it was a 2-day event. So we had a fabulous evening the night before, and she made me stand up in front of everybody and commit. She knew some of my story. She made me commit to telling my story from a stage in the next year. I will say whatever you want if you let me go sit back down because I did not talk in front of people. I was terrified to talk to people. So from that, I started getting in more rooms. I started looking at coaching. I was doing trauma coaching already, but I started looking at coaching as an actual profession and whether or not that's something that I could do. And ended up in a room at another event about 6 months later and was pulled on stage by my trauma coach and was like, "You're getting coached in front of 100 people. No, I can't do that. Like, I can't do that. Yes, you can. You can do this." And I got up on stage, shared some more of my story, got coached, really had an aha moment at that time that my biggest concern of going into coaching was, what if I can't physically show up for my clients because I do have some health issues? And what if I have to cancel an appointment? Or what if I, miss a call? And so that was what was holding me back from actually moving forward with getting a coaching certification. And so I got coached around that, talked about my story. And when I got down off of the stage, other women came to me and they said, "You are giving me permission to tell my story because you told yours." And that was an aha moment for me that I can do this even with obstacles and make a difference for other people. And then from that point, I started getting in more rooms and I started taking more personal development courses. I stayed connected with people that I met in those rooms. And it took a lot of work to get to the point where I could say, okay, I am enough the way that I am. I don't have to meet expectations from outside people because I have a path that I'm walking. I have a journey that I've been put on this earth for. That person doesn't know what my journey is because they didn't assign it to me. It's okay for them to say, "This is what my expectation is for you," but it's also okay for me to say, "You know what? That's great, but here's where I'm going."
It's a lot of transformation in 2 years.
Yeah.
And I know that you've just still hit the tops of the waves. I realize that that's kind of where that journey started, but I also think it's really important to understand the layers that even contributed to it. Right. We talked about some of the early childhood stuff and some of the factors that maybe played into overarching parts of your life, but that's only a small portion of the story still. Right. And yet you have also dealt with a great deal of loss, as well as you've had to be a full-time caretaker in some of the closest relationships that you have and some of those people that you love.
Yeah.
So we talked about this transition, but we didn't really get into much of your adult life, and that is okay. We don't need to cover all of it. But I would like to try to explore maybe some of the family specific components. I know that you had lost a kid. You had to care for your husband. And when you talk about the needs or the pressure or the weight that you felt that you were carrying for so many others, like, give us a little bit of a deeper understanding of what that looked like in the beginning and what it ultimately became before you went to this event 2 years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So when my daughter was 6, I had my second child, a son, And he was premature, and we lived in the mountains, and we were in a massive snowstorm, and we could not get him transferred out to another facility because everything was shut down and his lungs were underdeveloped, and he passed away in 24 hours. So then, less than a year after that, I had my third child. And less than a year after that, my husband had a traumatic brain injury due to a viral infection that attacked his brain. And at that point, he became unable to work. I was running a preschool and daycare full time at that time and had to take on that role of primary caregiver for him to move through this traumatic brain injury that he had suffered. In the process of that going on, my daughter was constantly getting hurt, constantly injuring herself, all kinds of weird injuries. And we actually, it took decades. It took until about 5 years ago that we actually discovered what was going on. So my daughter and my son and myself have a genetic disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome. And it affects the ligaments. It affects how our body uses collagen. So your body uses collagen in almost everything. So your connective tissues, your heart, your eyes, your muscles, your ligaments. And we were able to identify that in our case, all of these weird injuries that we kept getting were attributed to that. Well, at that point, I was diagnosed with an enlarged aorta of the heart and told, you're going to have open heart surgery because this is not something that can heal on its own, and you need to be monitored. You need to be careful with your physical activity, all of these precautions you need to take. And that was basically the tail end of COVID when that happened. And we decided at that point to make a multi-state move, and we transplanted our family from Colorado to Texas and basically started over in Texas with kind of a brand new life, but the beach, which we love, and no snow, which we love even more.
Yeah.
But then once we got to Texas, establishing new medical care and knowing that I was going to have this surgery, and then finding out that my heart had completely healed itself. So the surgery was off the table. I did not end up having to have the open heart surgery that they told me that I would have to have. I knew I didn't want to go down that path. I had worked in cardiology. My dad had open heart surgery. My father-in-law had open heart surgery. I knew I didn't want to go down that path, but had no idea that the stress and things like that you put on your body can take that kind of a physical toll. And when I was able to start focusing on my health and really putting that at the forefront, I was able to heal the issue in my heart. I had severe chronic pain issues from the Ehlers-Danlos that has now been much better controlled because I was able to say, you know what, I have to start putting myself first and taking the time to do that.
Which is pretty significant, and certainly not something that we're taught, especially not those of us that learn to perform early. And so I really do even appreciate all of what you crammed into there, because you took decades and kind of compressed it into a really tight answer. There are two variables that you've lived through that many would argue to be one of their worst nightmares, or many people don't find a way through. And that's losing a child and having your primary loved one become more of a patient than a partner.
Yeah.
And you've done both, and they both require major adjustment. They both require real intrinsic evaluation. They both require commitment in a variety of ways. And yet those are things that many people say, if it ever happened to me, it would crush me. And you've dealt with both of them. Could you give a little bit of, narrative or experience around how both of those two situations, maybe independently or within even the same time period, collectively impacted you? And what were the adjustments grieving and process you had to go through to shift your role effectively to support your family in that time.
Yeah. What I like looking back now, I didn't take time to grieve. I didn't take time to process. I was just, okay, this is the situation. How do I deal with it? What do I do? And keep moving forward. So I never took the time to process any of it. I never took the time to grieve anything. And I look back at that now and I'm like, gosh, like people ask, like, how did you make it through this? I just kept walking. I just kept going. For me, I felt like there was no other option but to just keep going.
You weren't given another option your entire life before that. So that
right,
makes sense.
exactly.
That checks out with what you shared earlier. Yeah.
Exactly. And I was, really the strong one. Everybody relied on me to be that support for them. And so I look back and I have huge gaps in my memory now. And I know that it's related to trauma and not processing grief and things like that, that you just bury it. And eventually it has to come to the surface. And it can come up in a variety of ways. It can come up with depression. It can come up with physical symptoms. I started just going. And I never could just sit and be quiet. I always felt like I had to be doing something. That turned into emotional eating. It turned into, just never being able to sit and process anything. So I've had to learn how to sit and process grief, how to sit and process the things that I went through now, 20 years later, and and move through that. But in doing so, that's how I found healing in my body. I had to do that work in my mind. I had to allow those things to process. I had to go through the trauma coaching. I had to go through the nervous system healing to be able to heal my body. And I had tried everything to heal my body to the point where I was looking at bariatric surgery, things like that, because my doctor had told me I was not going to survive much longer because I was so heavy and my health was so out of control. But nothing worked until I allowed myself to go through the healing and process everything. And then it's like your body holds on to all of it. And right? And when you process that, your body just goes, okay, we can get rid of all that extra stuff that we don't need anymore.
Yeah.
And for me, it was a huge amount of weight. It was, having to live up to other people's expectations. It was all of those things that I had carried.
How many years was your husband needing care after his TBI?
Gosh, he's still we still have to have somebody with him almost all of the time.
Okay.
Just somebody in the house in case he falls or something like that. He never went back to work after that. So he has been basically a stay-at-home dad. So I really took over everything in the sense of the finances, working, health insurance, everything all fell to me. And really never shifted back where he's taken control of any of that.
And this is for 20 years.
Yeah.
It's a lot. It's a lot to carry.
Yeah.
How much of the husband that you married do you still have access to?
I mean, his personality is different because there's frontal lobe damage from the infection. So his personality is different. He gets aggravated easier. Like before, he was just, everybody's like, gosh, your husband's so chill. He's just so calm. So definitely he gets aggravated easier and more frustrated with things, especially if he's trying to do something and he just can't get it. that gets him frustrated. And so definitely there's some behavior changes, things like
Yeah.
that. So it was a pretty significant difference that has not changed.
Yeah. I explore this area because it's a pretty significant factor,
Yeah.
right? And when you marry somebody and you have kids with them, most of us, right, have this vision for the future that we have. And part of the grieving is adjusting to a revised future.
Yeah.
Yet commitment is something that I referenced earlier that's required for you to do a lot of these things. And there's many people that would not have stuck around for 20 years to care for a partner, even though oftentimes at marriage, we say till death do us part. I have a lot of respect for your choice in consistently showing up. I also have this compassion and concern for you as a vibrant, still young woman and what that has meant for you in your life of love and connection. And I wouldn't ask you to say or speak to anything that would dishonor you and your husband, but I would ask, how have you allowed yourself to stay grounded, to stay committed, to keep yourself in that care role, especially for as many years as you have?
I think, it's kind of like what you said, where whenever I go into something, it's 100%. And I could have walked away at any point, at any time. But for me, that would feel like quitting. And I made a commitment, and I don't, I guess for a long time, I never felt like I had a choice. Like it was,
Yeah.
you have to do this. And that definitely, came from the constant expectations and things like that, you don't have a choice. And it definitely has not been an easy path. It's not something that every marriage will survive. And I can say that mine may still not survive that. It may still be a breaking point that I have this life where I've decided that I'm going to help others, and I've grown and I've changed. And a lot of times when you get married, you kind of grow and change together. And that didn't happen in our marriage because of this brain injury. And so it definitely, I'm not going to say that is ever off the table. That's something that's still.
That's fair. I wouldn't ask you to commit to one thing or another. I want you to be honest with yourself and true to it. That's what I was exploring, because it's a lot.
Yeah.
I mean, that really just genuinely is a lot. Especially for a partner, especially for that many years, especially in the early childhood raising and development years. It's a lot. It just is. And that's what I wanted to acknowledge is, and I want to, again, I say I respect and I like actually really appreciate the choice that you made. I also appreciate that you can acknowledge that you didn't view it as an option for a long time. And I love that you're able to at least recognize the flexibility and the options that could exist today, regardless of what path you take or what the timing is on that. That's not even relevant at this moment. But your ability to distinguish that is real.
Yeah.
I would tell you that I often approach commitment in a similar way. And I would suggest that marriage is one of those categories that I have, for my own marriage, with no judgment on what anybody else chooses to do, have made decisions that, like, I made a commitment, and I'm except in extreme dire cases of which I can't project or foresee, I don't see a path where that would change, though it's not off the table for me either.
Right.
What I wanted to explore here is not necessarily to get so specifically into this concept as it relates to your husband in this moment, but marriage is one of those factors that there's this expectation of commitment tied to it, right? And yet we see divorce rates really high, so that expectation doesn't necessarily drive everybody's behavior. But I am really curious, like when we look at something like this idea of commitment, and we make a decision at a period in our lives when we don't have experience, we don't have perspective, we don't have wisdom, we don't have, right? It's just the next thing we're going to do. We don't have critical thinking in the same way. We don't have, right, executive reasoning, and right, there's all these things that factor into our youth, and making a commitment around something that we're committing to for our lives. And some people will die on the sword for that commitment, and others, it's a flippant concept. I guess I don't know where I'm going with this question, other than what have you learned, I guess, through your own experience as it relates to commitments in a vacuum versus commitments that can evolve and still have choice?
Gosh, I think
You've probably never been asked that question before, by the way.
I
I'm sure
have
that one's an
not.
original. Yeah, all right.
I think that there's some commitments that you make that you know that it's going to be something drastic that would change your mind about that commitment. And there are other commitments that you make that feel very small. They're still commitment, but they probably feel very small. Like, oh, I told this person I would do this. You committed to it, but it's not like this huge commitment that you don't feel the same obligation to. I think that for me, looking at that commitment and then looking at where I was 2 years ago when I made the commitment to myself to make the changes and do the personal growth and do the trauma coaching and lose the weight and all of these things, I don't know that I would have taken that commitment as seriously as I did if I hadn't had to do it before. Not sure if that answers your question or not.
I don't know that there was an answer specifically for the question other than your perspective on it. Although I'm really curious by the closing statement that you made.
Yeah.
What do you, expand on that? I don't know that I would have taken the commitment as seriously if I'd not been committed before. Help me understand specifically what you mean by that.
I think if I hadn't had to walk through making a choice about a commitment like that before, or, I've had to make choices, hard choices about things. And if I had never had to make those choices or make those commitments before, letting myself continue to go would have been an easy decision because I wouldn't have had that resilience and strength and that will that making those hard decisions and those hard commitments and living those hard commitments had given me.
Yeah. Okay. That's fair. You mentioned and embedded in there earlier that you owned and operated a preschool and a daycare, right? And this was in the midst of all of the chaos in the very beginning period with your husband and new kids and all of it.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about that experience and maybe what got you into that. And what did you learn and extract from your time there?
Oh gosh. So I started out in college with the intent of going to law school. I was a criminal justice and psychology major in college, and I wanted to go to law school. I wanted to be a profiler. I loved the study of behavior. And I was enrolled in the police academy when I found out I was pregnant with my daughter and was told you can't go through the academy because you're pregnant. And I knew that I did not want to be an officer in the field if I had a young child. So moved more into the realm of, okay, what else could that look like? And I had the privilege of working with an FBI agent. He was one of my professors, and he was able to allow me to do some undercover work, and also with the DEA. So I had that experience. But then after I had my daughter, I knew I didn't want to continue down that path. So looking for things, what can I do that I don't have to put my daughter in daycare? It's so expensive and I don't want someone else raising my daughter. My husband was working full time at that time. And actually a family that I had nannied for, she came to me and she said, well, have you ever thought about having a preschool and daycare? She's like, that's what she was doing. And she's like, I get to take care of my kids. We get to go do things all the time. And I'm like, like the thought I had nannied for years growing up, and the thought of doing that had never crossed my mind. So bought a house and got licensed to be able to own a daycare and preschool in my home as a place of business, and did that for about 9 years and loved it. I love working with kids. I love, watching kids learn things, and that light goes on, and, you get to see them learn and discover themselves and things like that. So that it was really fun, and it allowed me the ability to stay home with my kids and raise my kids without having to put them in daycare. And then when my husband got sick, it gave me the flexibility. I could have other people come in when I was taking him to appointments and things like that. I could have other people come in and stay with the kids for a set amount of time while I took him to appointments and things like that. So it gave me that flexibility that I needed at the time.
Yeah. It's always amazing how the seasons and the things that are present in our lives are almost exactly what we need, even if we don't totally realize it at the time.
Yeah.
And, there's so many benefits to even what you just suggested, given all the contrast of the life that you were handed in many ways, that allowed you to actually be able to hold it all and hold it all in a way that was sustainable, even if it meant sacrificing yourself for a period. And it's just because you were unconscious to it. You've talked about this radical healing and this shift. You even referenced some of the weight loss and how you used to eat your feelings, but we've not talked in any detail around the number or the amount of weight loss. And it is very significant. And it is something that is life changing.
Yeah.
I mean, you've literally dropped another human in many respects and stepped fully into the one that was buried inside there. Talk a little bit about what the process of acknowledging and accepting where your weight and your health was, and what it took to catalyze you to actually do something different. You talked about the move. You've talked about some of the lifestyle changes and the event, but that isn't how it all just evaporates and goes away. There's work, there's choice, there's commitment that's all wrapped in. So talk a little bit about this journey specifically on the weight loss and your body relationship.
Yeah, I quit getting on the scale when it said 325 pounds. I didn't get on the scale after that. And I was sitting in my office at work one day, and everything was blurry, and I knew my blood sugars were out of control, made an urgent appointment at my doctor's office, and he walked in and he looked at me, and just very calmly and coldly, he said, "If you don't make changes, you're not going to live much longer." And my kids were, my daughter was in high school at the time, but I didn't know what to do with it. I had tried, like I said, I had tried everything. I had tried all kinds of diets. I had never tried any kind of coaching. I had never tried any kind of trauma therapy, anything like that. So I enrolled in a coaching certification to teach myself how to take care of myself. How do I eat? How do I process trauma? How do I do these things? And went through that certification so that I could learn how to heal myself. Had no idea that you could become a coach and coach other people, and just never put two and two together at that point. And so then that became kind of my primary focus. I explained to my family, this has to be a priority. I have to start doing this. And that was just the same time that I got invited into a room. That I finished my certification, got invited into a room, and had belief poured into me that I borrowed, because I couldn't believe the things that people were telling me I could do and showing me was possible. I borrowed that belief until I could believe it myself. Really saw that you don't have to live in the box. There's so much out there, and there's so many things. And so I started putting my health as my focus. I started learning how to eat properly. I started moving my body. I started supplementing. I started looking for other ways, chiropractic, anything I could find that would help my body heal. So in about 2.5 years, I have lost almost 160 pounds.
Yeah.
And just but it was physical weight, it was mental weight, it was emotional weight, it was
100% it was.
yeah,
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
you
And
know?
that's the thing. I mean, the way you talk about it, the body really does keep the score. And
Yeah,
yes, disease and disorders show up often, right? As a manifestation of unresolved trauma,
yeah,
emotional issues, mental belief systems that keep people stuck. And my physical pain was no different, right?
yeah,
Mine didn't show up
exactly.
as weight in all respects. Though I dealt with weight gain and weight loss for well over a decade before I got that part dialed in.
Yeah.
And but yet it's all about different layers. I met you not long after that first event. I would say within six, maybe 9 months of that time
Yeah,
frame is when I met you, right? Cause I've
yeah,
known you,
about
year and a half, maybe?
yeah, because I think last April is when I met you, and,
Mm-hmm.
yeah, so it's been just maybe less than 2 years.
So I notice a difference from the time I met you to where you are today,
Yeah.
right? It's really been fun to just watch you and your journey. Why don't you describe where you were when you and I met? And I'm not trying to make this about me. I'm more just a timeline perspective. You're 6 to 9 months into your journey. Like, where were you in that moment? Like, what have you already been doing? Where was your weight loss? Where was your belief system? I've got memories of some of the conversations we have, but I don't need to be the one to tell that. I'd like you to, like, just give us a little feel for, like, okay, I make this choice. I have this radical change. I'm showered with belief. And 6 months later, right? What's interesting is I'll bet if you look back today, you're like, man, I was just getting started.
Yeah.
But in a lot of ways, you also felt like you were light years ahead of where you were before. So just help
Yeah.
us understand, like, what that initial 6, 9, 12 months looked like in this journey, because it's often the hardest.
Yeah. So I for about the first 9 months, I was getting into rooms. I had just joined a mastermind. I was doing trauma coaching. I was getting certified as a master life coach, and really was like, "Oh man, like this is great." I was starting to lose weight. I had probably about 75 pounds when we
Yeah, because
met.
I thought it was a pretty significant number when we first met, which is, I mean, still,
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah, and really was like, "How can it get any better?" Like, "How can this get better?" But it's funny because I look back now and I'm like, there's still so many things that had to heal from that point
yeah,
to where I'm at now. And, so many layers that I didn't know about, and I didn't think at the time, I didn't think of healing as a journey. I was like, "Oh, you get healed and that's it." But it's not. You've got layers, and you never are going to be, I think, completely healed. There's always going to be more layers that you can peel back. And so really learning at that point, I still didn't use my voice very much. I still was very apprehensive about having hard conversations, and also like wanted to make sure that everybody still agreed with me. I still was not brave enough to be like, well, this is what I think and this is what I believe. And
yeah,
and now, like, that's completely different. I'm like, if you don't believe me, that's okay. If
yeah,
I can have, I had a hard conversation with my boss today that, but I was like, this is a conversation that has to be had, and learning that it's okay that everybody doesn't like what I have to say. The people
yeah.
that need to hear it are going to hear it, and that's who it's for.
Yes. But it's also interesting, and I'm going to highlight a couple specific things that I think are interesting and relevant for other people in the context of your story. The way you just framed it is exactly accurate, and even how I experienced you. There's this almost beginner healer's glow that, like, is obvious to me when people, like, first feel like they've tapped into that enlightenment or some clarity, and it's like there's this, like, shining that just exists, but at the same time, like, there's still a lot of self-protection and some timidness and a lot of self-doubt, and, like, self-worth is still not fully actualized, and, like, there's all these pieces. And so what I highlight is you had that glow, it was obvious that you were in the middle of doing some pretty heavy work. And I say that with respect, not with any criticism, but you also were still really struggling to step out of that caretaker role.
Yeah.
Even in that window. And I say that not to say that that's a bad thing, that it only in 6 months or 9 months you had decades that you've done in less than 2 years, you've unwound. But even in 6 months time, many people are like, man, well, now she saw it. She's been given all this belief. She's doing all these things. She lost 75 pounds. Well, she must be over this need to still be the full-time caregiver. And yet there's all these layers that just, you get more and more clarity. Do I have permission to reflect something to you in a way that I don't want to say concerned. I want to be extra cautious in how I communicate it?
Yeah.
Do I have permission to do that? I know we're on a show and recording.
Yeah, okay. Absolutely.
And you know me well enough to know, like, there's no ego in this. There's no pushing in this. And there's, this is only if it resonates and if it's helpful for you.
Yeah.
What I witnessed today compared to where you were at the time that we met, I have seen you step into and actually give yourself permission. I've seen you find, explore, and you're still actively testing your voice, right? You have put yourself in lots of rooms. You've asked lots of questions. You have set some goals. And you also are very much in a path of like helping to ensure that as many women can get the help that they need as possible. And all of that is real. So with what I say next, I want you to hear this with love and only a nudge to challenge you to just really make sure that you're always in as much congruence as possible.
Yeah.
We know all the history of your past, the performance, the expectations, the standards that were set. You've been a workaholic, an overachiever, a super performer, a perfectionist, your whole fucking life.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
You've done a shitload of healing, awareness, understanding, movement of energy, releasing of weight in all the categories that you said in 2 years. The new healer's glow isn't there, meaning you have a different existence, embodiment, confidence, grounding about you. And I feel like I haven't seen you in person really much since maybe 6-9 months ago. I think we briefly saw each other
like
at another
a year
event.
ago.
But like, and it was like brief. It wasn't even long.
Yeah.
But where I'm going with this, Monica, is you are also somebody I think that's always had a smile on your face because you believe you've needed to have a smile on your face. And there are sometimes, and I want to be clear when I say this, it doesn't come across as inauthentic. And I would bet you 99% of people wouldn't even pick up on it. But I do believe that there's sometimes that you're still in that smile performance mode in the state that you're in, particularly as it relates to your coaching and speaking business. Since you're still full-time employed, there's shame that's connected to that. And in some ways you shine brighter in a way that you're going to hopefully shield the parts that still aren't lived congruence for you.
Yep.
And am I on all on track?
Absolutely, 100%.
Okay.
Yeah. 100%.
The reason I was cautious is because I don't want you to hear that I'm suggesting that you're fabricating something that's not real. That's not at all what I'm saying. I think you are doing the work. You have done the healing. You are helping people. You're evolving. I'm seeing it real time. I would challenge that the interference and resistance that you feel about the dynamic that I just expressed gets eliminated with just one additional layer of truth in the way that you represent yourself. Because there's nothing to hide.
Yeah.
At all in any of the journey. And the ups, the downs, the struggles, the moments when you still get pulled right back into where you felt 20 years ago, even for 10 minutes, that's still a part of your journey. And I have every reason to believe you share that in the women that you work with. You probably share that in the small groups that you do. But I'm challenging you to allow that to be the next layer of permission that you give to yourself and to others, because there's a freedom in it that I don't think you've fully experienced yet.
And you have no idea like how spot on you are. It's something that I've realized in the last couple weeks. And so I decided, you know what? I need to do more deep, intensive coaching myself. And so now I have a coach that I'm working with to help exactly with that, because I found myself doing that.
I'm happy that you had the awareness that you were already on that path. I was feeling it. And because I care, I felt the need to just share, because
Absolutely.
all of the good that you highlighted is real.
Mm.
And this isn't a bad, it's just a dynamic.
Right.
And it's a part of the healing process. But I would suggest that for us to have unshakable belief, it's actually to get to the place where we have nothing to justify, protect, or defend.
Yeah.
Because who we are and the worth that we exist has nothing to do with what you see on the outside. Right.
Exactly.
And that's all I'm trying to just land for you. And one more little gentle nudge that it's like, you can and you will.
Yeah. Yep.
As we wrap towards the tail end of this interview, thank you for letting me go there.
Absolutely.
Thank you for letting me share that. You are doing a lot of great work. You've become a best-selling author. You've got the Unshakeable Belief podcast. You're speaking on stages with some of the biggest names in the industry. You went from not having a voice and being terrified of people 2 years ago to now you're helping other women find their own voice. Give us just a little bit of a feel for genuinely what your reset coaching program looks like. And, from today moving forward, like, where are you going and what's the impact that you plan to leave?
Yeah. So I have one-on-one coaching. I use a program called Rise. It's a program I developed. Really, there's 3 C's of your transformation. There's clarity, confidence, and consistency. So understanding who you are and what you need to do to heal, building trust in yourself and trust in your body, and then creating daily habits that align with your purpose and sustain that transformation. That goes through my group coaching. That's also part of my one-on-one coaching that I do. So, and then, like you said, I have a podcast. I have a book that I have 2 anthologies that I've released. I'm releasing a solo book in February of 2026. And really the impact, I was sitting thinking about this a couple months ago. What do I want my impact to be? And obviously something generational, because I think that as we heal, we give permission to others to heal. So as women heal, we give permission to our sisters, we give permission to our daughters, our nieces, our people that we're in community with. We give them that permission to heal. But I would like to affect the lives of 7 million women in the next 5 years through nervous system healing, identity coaching, and just helping them learn to rise as leaders in their homes, their business, and their communities in the purpose that they were put here for.
Why 7 million?
I don't know. That number just came to me. I was sitting working on goals one day, and I just was like, what do I want to accomplish? And for me, it's praying. What is a goal I can set for myself? And that's what was downloaded to me, was 7 million women in 5 years.
Okay. So while I can appreciate and fully respect that answer and that it came in a download, I would challenge you to tie it to something specific and tangible for you.
Yeah.
Right? Why either, and it doesn't have to, I'm not challenging the number nor the timeline. I just want you to have a deeper why than this is the number that popped in my head.
Yeah.
And that's not, I don't mean that to suggest that the number popping in your head is bad or insignificant. But what I am suggesting is on the more clear you can be to the why, the how, the when, the path that it's going to get there, what that transformation looks like, who those women are, the more reality the more realistic that becomes every day you live it. And so that's what I would challenge. I think that's amazing. I think it's awesome. And I love the work that you're doing. We're going to put all of your stuff in the show notes, so that people can find you and follow you and do these things. Monica, I'm grateful for your time here with us today. Is there anything you'd like to say to kind of close this thought or kind of wrap our conversation from your perspective?
I love spending time with you. Something that I always love to tell people is that always remember you were made for more, and you are here for a purpose, and you can live your best life in that purpose.
Beautiful. My friend, thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And for those of you that just watched Monica flip open her lid and jump in, man, it started very early in her life with an injury, a belief system that was ingrained that really was expectations and shame that developed into a resilience and a work ethic that allowed her to have unshakable belief. But a whole nother string of situations that she'd not been prepared to understand, to process, to feel, to grieve, to regulate, put her back right into that same performance mode, having to be a full-time caretaker for her husband and a variety of other pieces. Now, through that, she lost herself. She gained more of her physical self and buried a lot of the emotional and spiritual weight in the ways that she ate and operated. Guess what? This is a story that we've heard many, many times, but very few live through the combo of all of those things, have the resiliency and the positivity on the tail end of it. Monica's 2-year-ago transformation, losing of 150 pounds and stepping fully into who she is while actually leaving a prior self of her behind, is possible for each and every one of you, but it's only if you ask the questions, find your purpose, and live in it, like she said. And that's going to require you to flip open your lid and scan your can. We'll see you next time.
What you can probably tell by now is that I love telling these stories, but what I love even more is the impact that's coming from them. You see, we're on a mission to impact over 1 billion lives as quickly as possible, but to do that, we need you. See, we believe that moved people move people. And so all I'm asking is if you've resonated, connected with any of the messaging, please consider commenting, sharing, leave a rating and review. Thank you so much for tuning into Flipping the Lid. And if you want more information on the show, how to become a guest, how to recommend a guest, or any of the other details, head over to flippingthelid.com. We'll see you there.